I'm Cassandra Mitchell, 34, standing on Italian marble floors in the mansion I just purchased. The shock on my brother Derek's face when he discovered I owned it was worth every penny of the $5.2 million I paid in cash. All those years of Derek's so brilliant and "you'll never own a house like your brother" from my parents led to this moment. Now I watch through floor-to-ceiling windows as their car pulls up my circular driveway for the housewarming party. They have no idea this is my home. Before I dive into my story, where are you watching from today? If you're enjoying this journey of sweet revenge, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of underdogs who conquered despite the odds stacked against them. Now, let's rewind to where it all began. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, I learned early on that my worth in our family was somehow less than my brother's. Derek was 2 years older, and according to my parents, he hung the moon and stars. Every achievement of his was celebrated with extravagant dinners and proud phone calls to relatives. My accomplishments? They were met with distracted nods, and "that's nice," honey comments before the conversation inevitably turned back to Derek's latest triumph. When Derek made the honor roll, our parents bought him a new computer. When I made the honor roll with higher grades, I got a pat on the back and a reminder that it wasn't the same because Derek was taking much harder classes. The truth was, we were both in advanced placement courses, but that reality didn't fit their narrative. Derek excelled in baseball and debate club, and our parents never missed a single game or tournament. They'd sit front and center, cheering loudly, wearing custom-made t-shirts with his face printed on them. Meanwhile, when I won the regional math competition 3 years in a row, my mother attended once, spending the entire time on her phone. My father never came at all, claiming he had important work meetings that couldn't be rescheduled. The most painful memory came on my 16th birthday. For weeks, I'd dropped hints about wanting driving lessons. I'd saved up from my part-time job at the local library for half the cost of a used car, hoping my parents might match my savings as they'd promised. The morning of my birthday, I walked downstairs to find my parents and Derek standing in the kitchen with huge smiles. My heart leapt until I realized the keys in my father's hand weren't for me. "Derek got accepted to debate camp at Northwestern," my father announced proudly. "We know it's your birthday, Cass, but we thought you wouldn't mind sharing the spotlight. We got him a car so he can drive himself to practice sessions." I stood frozen as Derek dangled the keys to a brand new Honda Civic not even used while my gift sat on the counter. A $50 gift card to the mall and a birthday card signed only by my mother. When I asked about our agreement regarding the car, my father scoffed. "Be realistic, Cassandra. You're just good with numbers. Derek has a future that requires mobility. You'll never own a car like your brother's anyway. You should focus on more achievable goals." That night, I cried myself to sleep. But something changed in me. A spark of determination ignited that would eventually become an inferno. While my parents paid for Derek's SAT prep courses and hired special tutors for his college applications, I stayed up late studying on my own. I worked 3 part-time jobs at the library, a local coffee shop, and babysitting on weekends. When my grades surpassed Derek's, my parents suggested his course load was simply more rigorous, despite evidence to the contrary. My salvation came in the form of Mrs. Reynolds, my high school guidance counselor. She noticed my aptitude for finance and business when I created a budgeting system that the student council adopted. She called me into her office one afternoon during my junior year. "Cassandra, you have extraordinary talent," she said, the first adult who'd ever acknowledged my abilities. "Have you considered applying for the National Business Scholars Program?" I hadn't, because no one had ever told me such opportunities existed. Mrs. Reynolds helped me complete the application in secret, knowing my parents would somehow find a way to make it about Derek. When I received the scholarship, Mrs. Reynolds helped me hide the acceptance letter until I had developed a full plan to attend business school without my parents' financial support. For once, I had someone who believed in me. I wasn't just good with numbers. I had potential, and I was going to prove my parents wrong, even if they never acknowledged it. College hit me like a tidal wave. While Derek attended Princeton with our parents covering every expense from tuition to his luxury apartment, I enrolled at NYU's Stern School of Business, cobbling together my scholarship with student loans and savings. The scholarship covered about 60% of my tuition, but New York City living expenses meant I needed multiple jobs to stay afloat. I worked as a barista opening a coffee shop at 5 a.m., then rushed to classes, followed by an evening job in the university library and weekend shifts at a retail store in Soho. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford, averaging 4 hours on good nights. My tiny apartment was shared with 3 other girls in a space designed for 2, with my bedroom being a converted walk-in closet where my twin bed barely fit. Despite this grueling schedule, I excelled academically. Business strategy came naturally to me, and financial modeling felt like solving fascinating puzzles. While other students struggled with complex market analysis, I found clarity in the numbers, seeing patterns and opportunities others missed. My professors noticed. I didn't just get good grades, I received invitations to special seminars and advanced study groups typically reserved for graduate students. During winter break of my sophomore year, I made the mistake of sharing my excitement about a business idea with my family. I developed a concept for a micro-investment platform aimed at college students, allowing them to invest as little as $5 at a time into diversified portfolios. "That's interesting, Cassandra," my father said with minimal enthusiasm. Derek, however, perked up immediately. 3 weeks later, I discovered why. Derek presented the exact same idea in his entrepreneurship class at Princeton, receiving accolades and attention from the business department. My parents called me, ecstatic about Derek's innovative thinking. "Isn't your brother brilliant?" My mother gushed. "He's presenting this investment platform idea to actual venture capitalists next month." "That was my idea," I said quietly. "I told everyone at Christmas." The silence lasted only a moment before my father cleared his throat. "Now, Cassandra, don't be jealous. Derek has expanded on whatever basic concept you mentioned. His implementation is completely different." It wasn't. When Derek eventually showed me his presentation out of courtesy, it contained the exact market analysis, revenue projections, and even the same name I had created. The betrayal stung worse than any childhood slight. He hadn't just taken my idea, he'd stolen my intellectual property. When I confronted him privately, his response chilled me. "Come on, Cass," he said with a smirk. "We both know you wouldn't have done anything with it anyway. I'm doing you a favor by making sure a good idea doesn't go to waste." The venture capitalists ultimately passed on the concept, calling it promising but underdeveloped. Derek quickly moved on to other projects, but the incident left a permanent crack in my already fragile trust. My second ally appeared when I needed one most. Professor Harrison, my advanced financial markets instructor, noticed my enthusiasm diminishing after Derek's betrayal. He asked me to stay after class one day. "Miss Mitchell, your latest paper on emerging market indicators was exceptional," he began. "But I sense something's bothering you. Your participation has decreased significantly in the past few weeks. Perhaps it was exhaustion or the weight of carrying my frustrations alone, but I found myself explaining everything: my family dynamics, Derek's theft, my struggle to balance work and studies." Instead of dismissing me, Professor Harrison listened intently. "I see tremendous potential in you," he said when I finished. "More than most students I've taught in 20 years. I'd like to connect you with an internship opportunity at Morgan Stanley. It's competitive, but with your analytical skills, I believe you could secure a position." His confidence in me was the lifeline I needed. I poured myself into the application, creating a portfolio that showcased my unique approach to market analysis. Professor Harrison's recommendation emphasized my ability to identify investment opportunities in overlooked sectors. The interview process progressed promisingly until the final round. Then came Derek's second betrayal. Somehow, he discovered my internship opportunity through his Princeton network. Days before my final interview, rumors circulated among the Morgan Stanley hiring committee that I had fabricated portions of my application and had been academically disciplined at NYU. None of it was true, but the damage was done. The position went to another candidate. When I called home, devastated, my mother offered cold comfort. "Maybe this is for the best, Cassandra. That internship would have been overwhelming for you anyway. Derek just got accepted to a summer program at Goldman Sachs. Perhaps that's more the level you should aim for in a few years." I almost quit then. Sitting on my narrow bed in that converted closet, surrounded by textbooks and half-eaten ramen, I seriously considered dropping out. What was the point of fighting so hard when my own family actively worked against me? But something in me refused to surrender. That night, I opened my laptop and began researching investment strategies with my meager savings of $1,200. If no one would give me an opportunity, I would create my own. By graduation day, those small investments had grown to nearly $8,000 through careful research and strategic risk-taking. I stood in my cap and gown, summa cum laude honors cords draped around my neck, watching as my parents fussed over Derek's cum laude status, helping him adjust his cap for photos. Derek's grades are impressive considering his active social life and leadership roles, my father announced to nearby families. Cassandra's good grades came easier since she just focused on studying. I clutched my diploma, a silent promise to myself. This was just the beginning. My entry into the professional world came through a junior analyst position at Wakefield Partners, a boutique investment firm in Manhattan. The starting salary was modest by New York standards, but it offered something more valuable than money exposure to diverse investment strategies and direct client interaction, rare for recent graduates. From day one, I approached the job with unstoppable drive. While colleagues left at 6 p.m., I stayed until midnight, analyzing market trends and developing investment models. When others enjoyed weekend brunches, I was at my desk, poring over quarterly reports and identifying emerging opportunities. My singular focus: prove that I wasn't just good with numbers, but exceptional at creating wealth. My immediate supervisor, Lillian Hayes, initially viewed my intensity with skepticism. "Mitchell, this isn't a competition," she remarked after finding me still working at 10 p.m. one Tuesday. "Burning yourself out won't impress anyone." "I'm not trying to impress," I replied without looking up from my spreadsheets. "I'm trying to succeed." Within 6 months, my portfolio recommendations had outperformed those of analysts with 3 years' experience. When a major client requested a specific analyst to handle their account, my name topped their list. The recognition felt validating, but family gatherings quickly undermined any sense of accomplishment. "Cassandra works at some small investment place," my mother explained at Thanksgiving dinner. "Nothing like Derek's position at Goldman, of course. But it's a start." Derek, now a junior investment banker, dominated the conversation with stories of celebrity clients and million-dollar deals most exaggerated, as I would later discover. When I mentioned a successful investment strategy I'd developed that had yielded a 22% return for clients, Derek smirked. "Retail investing is child's play," he announced to the table. "My team handles transactions that would make your head spin, Cass. Maybe in a few years, you'll understand how the big leagues work." My parents nodded approvingly, completely missing that my retail strategy was outperforming major hedge funds. Their dismissal stung, but I channeled the frustration into my work. By the end of my first year, I had developed a specialized approach to technology investments, identifying undervalued companies poised for exponential growth. My personal portfolio, started with my graduation savings, had grown to nearly $50,000 through careful application of my strategies. I began documenting my investment approach, creating detailed frameworks for identifying opportunities that others missed. During a rare Sunday dinner at my parents' house, I foolishly mentioned my personal investment success, explaining some basic principles of my strategy. Derek appeared disinterested, scrolling through his phone throughout my explanation. 2 weeks later came the second major betrayal. "Cassandra! Wonderful news!" My mother called one evening. "Derek has convinced your father and me to let him manage our retirement accounts. He's developed this brilliant strategy for technology investments that he says will double our money in 3 years." My stomach dropped as she described, point by point, the exact methodology I had shared. When I tried explaining that those were my strategies, not Derek's, my father cut me off. "Don't be ridiculous, Cassandra. Derek has been explaining these concepts to us for years. You probably picked up some ideas from him during family discussions and are confused about who came up with what." They transferred their entire retirement savings, nearly $600,000, to Derek's management, using my investment strategy but giving him full credit. Worse, Derek had positioned himself as their financial advisor, despite having no experience with personal wealth management. The betrayal spiraled beyond family when my supervisor called me into her office the following month. "Mitchell, we need to talk about confidentiality," Lillian said, her expression severe. "We've received information that you've been sharing proprietary firm strategies with family members. Specifically, your brother at Goldman Sachs." Horror washed over me as I realized what had happened. Derek had not only stolen my personal investment strategies, but had presented some aspects that resembled Wakefield's approaches, creating the impression I had leaked company information. The accusation could end my career before it truly began. "That's categorically false," I stated, maintaining composure despite my racing heart. "I've never shared firm strategies with anyone. The investment approach my brother is using came from my personal research, developed independently during my college years. I have dated documentation proving this is my intellectual property." The next week involved intense scrutiny of my work and personal investment records. Thankfully, my meticulous documentation saved my position, but trust had been damaged. Lillian placed me on different accounts, away from our highest-profile clients. "I believe you," she said privately, "but perception matters in this industry. You'll need to rebuild your reputation." Rather than breaking me, this setback fueled my determination. I worked even harder, developing client relationships and refining my investment approaches. 6 months later, my consistent performance earned me a promotion to junior analyst, skipping 2 hierarchical positions, an unprecedented advancement that caused ripples throughout the firm. Meanwhile, I learned through my mother that Derek had already lost 30% of their retirement savings through risky, poorly researched investments that deviated from my careful strategy. Yet somehow, they blamed market conditions rather than his mismanagement. "Investment is always risky," my father explained dismissively when I expressed concern. "Derek says this is normal volatility. We trust his expertise." That night, I made a decision that would alter my career trajectory. I would no longer share any aspect of my professional or financial life with my family. My success would speak for itself when the time was right. By my 3rd year at Wakefield Partners, I had established myself as the firm's rising star. My technology investment portfolio consistently outperformed market indices by significant margins, attracting attention throughout the industry. My specialty had evolved into identifying sustainable technology companies, those developing solutions for climate change, resource scarcity, and energy efficiency long before ESG investing became mainstream. My salary had tripled since my starting position, and my personal investments had grown to over $300,000. I moved from my cramped shared apartment to a modest 1-bedroom in Chelsea, my first time living alone. The space wasn't luxurious, but it represented hard-won independence. Clients began specifically requesting me despite my relative youth. Industry publications featured my investment recommendations in articles about emerging financial talent. At 27, I was invited to speak at a prestigious financial conference about future trends in sustainable technology investments. The professional recognition was validating, but my family remained unimpressed. At Christmas dinner, Derek dominated conversation with stories about his promotion at Goldman Sachs, though I later discovered he had merely received a standard title change based on years of service rather than merit. "Derek manages a team now," my mother announced proudly as she passed the potatoes. "Isn't that wonderful, Cassandra? Maybe he can give you some leadership tips." I bit my tongue, not mentioning that I was now managing a $200 million portfolio, while Derek's responsibilities remained largely administrative. When I briefly mentioned my conference speaking engagement, my father nodded distractedly before asking Derek about his new company car. Later that evening, I overheard my parents in the kitchen. "Should we ask Cassandra about the retirement accounts?" my mother whispered. "They've lost almost half their value now." "Absolutely not," my father replied firmly. "Derek says it's just a temporary downturn. Besides, Cassandra would just use it as an opportunity to criticize her brother. You know how jealous she's always been of his success." Their willful blindness was maddening, but I had stopped expecting rational assessment from them years ago. 3 weeks after that Christmas visit, my professional world imploded without warning. My division director, Thomas Warren, called me into his office where I found Lillian looking uncomfortable and the company's HR director seated with a notepad. "Cassandra, We've received some concerning information about your mental stability and investment decision-making. Thomas began formally. A close family member contacted us with documented instances of erratic behavior and questionable financial decisions in your personal life. Shock rendered me temporarily speechless. Thomas slid a letter across the desk written on Goldman Sachs letterhead and signed by Derek. The letter detailed fabricated instances of concerning behavior, including invented gambling problems, alleged prescription drug abuse, and supposedly risky personal financial decisions. It suggested a compassionate approach of temporary reassignment while I sought appropriate help. These allegations are completely false, I finally managed, my voice steadier than I felt. This is a malicious attempt by my brother to damage my career, likely because his own financial management has resulted in significant losses for my parents. The 3-hour meeting that followed was the most humiliating experience of my professional life. I was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. My clients were temporarily reassigned. Despite my protests and character references from colleagues, the firm had to take such allegations seriously, particularly given Derek's position at a prestigious institution. For 2 weeks, I lived in professional limbo, alternating between rage and despair. My reputation built through countless late nights and flawless investment strategies hung by a thread because of family jealousy. The truth emerged through an unexpected ally. Amanda Chen, a former colleague who now worked at Goldman Sachs, reached out after hearing office gossip about Derek's unstable sister. "Cassandra, I've worked with you. This doesn't sound like you at all," she said over coffee. "And frankly, your brother's reputation here doesn't match what he tells your family." Amanda revealed that Derek was on probation at Goldman for poor performance and had been passed over for promotion twice. His team leadership role was largely ceremonial, given to appease an important client who liked him socially. The letter he'd sent had been written on stolen company letterhead, constituting a fireable offense if discovered. Armed with this information and documentation from Amanda, I approached Wakefield's executive committee directly. The investigation concluded with my full reinstatement and a formal apology, but the damage to my standing within the firm lingered. Clients questioned my stability despite the allegations being disproven. Colleagues treated me with awkward caution. When I confronted my parents about Derek's sabotage, showing them copies of his fabricated letter, their response left me breathless. "You've always been jealous of Derek's success," my mother said, refusing to even look at the evidence. "He says you're becoming unstable because you can't accept his achievements. We're worried about you, Cassandra. Maybe you should see someone," my father added. "Get some professional help for this resentment you've always harbored." It was the final straw. I realized then that no achievement of mine would ever be enough. No evidence would ever convince them. Derek could do no wrong. I could do no right. After being fully cleared and reinstated at Wakefield, I made the boldest decision of my career. I would leave to start my own investment firm. Despite offers of promotion and increased compensation, I knew I had to create something entirely my own. Something even my family couldn't dismiss or diminish. The day I submitted my resignation, Lillian looked genuinely regretful. "You're the most talented analyst I've ever mentored," she admitted. "The firm is making a mistake, not fighting harder to keep you." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a rare moment of professional validation. "But I need to build something that's undeniably mine." As I packed my office, I found new determination replacing my hurt. The family that should have been my greatest support had become my greatest obstacle. But obstacles, as I'd learned in the market, often indicated you were on the right path, the path others feared to travel. Launching Mitchell's Sustainable Capital at 29 years old ranked among the most terrifying experiences of my life. I converted my Chelsea apartment's second bedroom into an office, invested $250,000 of my savings into basic operations, and prepared for months of struggle building a client base. The early days were brutal. Former clients expressed interest but hesitated to move their money to a startup firm. Potential investors questioned my experience despite my track record. Men twice my age with half my performance history secured funding more easily. Each night I questioned my decision, calculating how long I could survive without income. My breakthrough came through Professor Harrison, who had remained a mentor since NYU. He connected me with Javier Montoya, a tech entrepreneur who had recently sold his company for $85 million and sought investment guidance. Most wealth managers are giving me the same tired portfolio mix, Javier said during our first meeting in my makeshift office. Show me something different. I presented my sustainable technology investment framework, explaining how it had outperformed traditional approaches by 18% annually. Unlike other advisors who promised unrealistic returns, I detailed specific risks alongside growth strategies. My transparency impressed him. You're not selling me fantasy returns. I appreciate that, he said before transferring $10 million to my management, my first major client. Javier's investment performed exceptionally, gaining 22% in the first year while maintaining conservative risk profiles. Impressed, he referred 3 colleagues, each bringing between $5.15 million. Suddenly, Mitchell Sustainable Capital was managing over $40 million, allowing me to lease proper office space in the financial district and hire 2 junior analysts. As word spread about my firm's performance, business publications began featuring my investment approach. A profile in Financial Innovators magazine called me the Sustainable Investment Prodigy Redefining Wealth Creation. The feature included my philosophy on ethical investing and long-term value creation, alongside my photo on the cover. I sent a copy to my parents, hoping finally for acknowledgement. My mother called 3 days later. "We saw your magazine article," she said, her voice oddly flat. "It's nice. Did you know Derek is working with several celebrities now? He can't name them because of confidentiality, but they're very famous." The dismissal was so expected it barely registered anymore. What I didn't expect was Derek's next move. 3 months after the magazine feature, I learned he had left Goldman Sachs to start his own investment firm, Mitchell Family Wealth Management. His marketing materials prominently featured phrases and investment philosophy statements lifted directly from my interviews and website. He positioned himself as a pioneer in sustainable investment, my specialized field, despite having no background or expertise in the area. "Your brother's new venture sounds similar to yours," Professor Harrison noted carefully, after seeing Derek's announcement in an industry newsletter. Similar was an understatement. Derek had essentially created a parallel firm mimicking my business model, investment philosophy, and even similar branding, clearly hoping to capitalize on potential client confusion between our firms. The situation worsened when my parents not only transferred what remained of their retirement savings to Derek's new firm, but began actively promoting his services throughout their social network, describing him as continuing the family's financial expertise tradition. They never once mentioned my firm to friends or colleagues. The betrayal stung, but I had anticipated some version of it. What I hadn't expected was Derek's aggressive targeting of my client base. He began contacting my clients directly, suggesting my firm was overextended and implying I lacked the infrastructure to properly manage large portfolios. Several clients called seeking reassurance, which I provided through transparent discussion of my firm's growth strategy and risk management protocols. Most stayed, but 3 smaller clients transferred their assets to Derek's management, a $12 million loss that threatened my firm's stability just as I was expanding. The stress manifested physically. I developed insomnia, lost weight, and experienced my first panic attack during a client presentation. For the first time since college, I questioned whether I could continue fighting against the constant undermining. One particularly bad night, after losing another client to Derek's poaching, I called Mrs. Reynolds, my high school counselor who had become a friend and confidant. "Cassandra, listen to me," she said firmly after I poured out my frustrations. "This behavior from your family isn't about you. It never has been. It's about their own limitations. Derek targets you because he knows he can't match your talent legitimately. But he's winning," I whispered. "Clients believe him because he's a man with the Goldman pedigree. He's winning small battles by cheating," she corrected me. "But you're building something authentic. That's what will endure. Now, what's your next move?" Her question jolted me from self-pity to strategy. I spent that night developing a new approach, one that would differentiate my firm so distinctly from Derek's that no confusion could exist. Where traditional firms, and now Derek's, focused on maximizing short-term returns regardless of impact, I would double down on ethical investment, creating portfolios that generated exceptional returns while supporting environmental sustainability, fair labor practices, and corporate governance. This wasn't just marketing, it was a fundamental business philosophy that matched my personal values. I called this approach conscious capital and completely rebranded my firm around the concept. Within 6 months, I published a widely circulated white paper demonstrating how ethical investment could outperform traditional approaches over 5-year horizons. The paper was picked up by major financial publications and established me as a thought leader in the emerging field. New clients specifically seeking ethical investment options began approaching my firm. The assets under my management grew to $95 million by the end of that year. Meanwhile, rumors circulated that Derek's firm was struggling with performance issues, as his copied strategies failed without my analytical framework supporting them. My personal breakthrough came when the Bainbridge Foundation, a $200 million family foundation with strict ethical investment requirements, selected my firm to manage their endowment after a competitive review of 26 wealth management companies, including several industry giants and Derek's firm. The day I signed the Bainbridge contract, doubling my firm's assets under management overnight, I allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. I had created something uniquely mine, something that reflected my values and expertise, something my family could no longer diminish or deny. I purchased my first luxury item that week, not out of materialism, but as a personal milestone marker. A vintage Cartier watch that reminded me how far I'd come from the exhausted college student working 3 jobs. Looking at it reminded me that while time had often seemed against me, in the end, it had revealed the truth about ability, integrity, and perseverance. By my 33rd birthday, Mitchell Sustainable Capital had transformed the investment landscape. What began as my singular approach had evolved into an industry standard, with major firms scrambling to create their own ethical investment divisions. Assets under my management exceeded $850 million, with a client waiting list despite my selective acceptance policy. I now employed 28 people in offices spanning 3 floors of a Manhattan high-rise. Business media regularly sought my commentary on market trends and sustainable investment. Forbes named me to their 40 under 40 list, highlighting how my firm had achieved 24% average annual returns while maintaining strict ethical investment criteria. A profile in the Wall Street Journal called me the conscience of capital, noting how my approach was forcing broader industry change. My personal investments had grown accordingly. I purchased a comfortable but not ostentatious apartment in Tribeca, invested in female-founded startups, and established a scholarship for underprivileged business students at NYU Stern named after Mrs. Reynolds, who had believed in me when no one else did. Despite my success, I maintained minimal contact with my family. Quarterly phone calls with my mother and obligatory holiday visits constituted our entire relationship. These interactions followed a predictable pattern: brief, superficial inquiries about my work, followed by lengthy updates about Derek's supposed achievements and growing social connections. I learned through these conversations that Derek's firm struggled with inconsistent performance and client retention. Despite his marketing efforts positioning himself as a sustainable investment pioneer, his fundamental lack of understanding of the underlying principles resulted in poor returns and strategy drift. My parents' retirement accounts, once worth nearly $600,000, had dwindled to under $200,000 through Derek's mismanagement. Yet they continued to defend him, blaming market conditions and unforeseeable economic factors rather than his incompetence. Investment is always unpredictable, my father explained during a rare phone conversation. Derek says even the top firms are having difficulty in this climate. I bit my tongue, not mentioning that my firm had posted record returns during the same period by correctly anticipating market shifts. The family dynamic remained unchanged despite external realities. What I didn't anticipate was how desperate Derek would become as his firm faltered. The 5th betrayal proved the most damaging of all. The Hampton Group, a family office controlling nearly $2 billion in assets, had been considering my firm for their sustainable investment portfolio. After 6 months of presentations, due diligence, and relationship building, They were 1 week away from signing management agreements for an initial $500 million allocation, a transformative opportunity that would elevate my firm to a new tier within the industry. 3 days before the scheduled signing, I received an emergency call from Robert Hampton, the family patriarch. "Cassandra, we need to discuss some troubling information that's reached us," he began, his tone grave. "We've received documentation suggesting your firm has been misrepresenting performance figures and engaging in questionable trading practices." My blood turned cold as he detailed allegations that had clearly come from Derek and my parents. They had approached the Hampton Group directly, providing doctored performance records suggesting my firm manipulated reporting metrics. They'd implied I had personal financial problems, forcing me to take excessive risks with client funds. Most damaging, they'd suggested regulatory authorities were investigating my firm, a complete fabrication but terrifying to potential clients. "Mr. Hampton, these allegations are categorically false," I stated, struggling to maintain professional composure. "My firm maintains the highest ethical standards, with fully transparent reporting verified by independent auditors. I believe these claims originate from my estranged brother, who operates a competing firm with significantly poorer performance." Despite my explanation and offer to provide comprehensive documentation refuting every claim, the damage was done. The Hampton Group placed their decision on hold pending further investigation, effectively killing the deal without explicitly withdrawing. Word spread quickly through the close-knit investment community. Other potential clients began canceling meetings. Existing clients called demanding reassurance and additional verification of performance metrics. The regulatory inspection that Derek had invented suddenly appeared on my calendar as authorities responded to anonymous concerns. Within 3 weeks, clients representing over $300 million had withdrawn their investments despite my firm's excellent performance. My staff looked increasingly worried as rumors about the firm's stability circulated on industry websites. For the first time since founding my company, I faced potential bankruptcy. The rapid client withdrawals strained our operational capacity. I was forced to lay off 8 staff members, talented people I'd personally recruited and mentored. Each exit interview felt like a personal failure. The regulatory inspection, though ultimately finding no issues, created documentation requirements that consumed hundreds of staff hours. Legal fees for defending against the baseless allegations exceeded $200,000. My firm's carefully built reputation suffered damage that couldn't be quantified. During this crisis, I learned through a mutual connection that Derek had been personally calling my remaining major clients, suggesting they withdraw their funds before an imminent regulatory action. He had even created a presentation specifically targeting Hampton Group, offering to manage their assets at significantly reduced fees. The betrayal's calculating nature stunned me. This wasn't sibling rivalry or unconscious favoritism, it was a deliberate attempt to destroy what I had built. I considered legal action but recognized the emotional and financial toll a protracted family legal battle would take. Instead, I focused entirely on salvaging my firm. I worked 20-hour days, personally calling every client to address concerns. I opened my books completely, inviting clients to examine every transaction and decision process. I reduced my personal compensation to zero to maintain staff salaries. For 6 weeks, I operated on pure determination and minimal sleep. When a major international investment group unexpectedly approached me during this period, I initially assumed they were opportunistically looking to acquire my struggling firm at a discount. Instead, Ibrahim Al-Sayed, the group's chief investment officer, explained their interest stemmed from my ethical investment approach and consistent returns. "We've been monitoring your methodology for 18 months, Ibrahim explained during our first meeting. "The recent rumors concerned us, but our due diligence found them baseless. We're interested in allocating $350 million to your management as part of our sustainability initiative." Their timing couldn't have been more critical. The influx of new capital stabilized my firm, allowing me to rehire several laid-off employees and reassure remaining clients. Within 3 months, assets under management had recovered to pre-crisis levels. The regulatory investigation concluded with a clean report, which I published prominently on my website and shared with industry publications. As my firm stabilized, I made a strategic decision. For years, I had focused on organic growth and relationship-based client acquisition. Now, I recognized the need for scale and institutional protection. I began exploring strategic acquisitions of smaller firms whose investment philosophy aligned with mine, building a more diversified and resilient organization. The crisis that Derek and my parents had engineered to destroy me ultimately forced me to build something stronger, larger, and more influential than I had initially envisioned. By my 34th birthday, Mitchell Sustainable Capital was no longer just an investment firm, but a growing financial ecosystem, championing ethical wealth creation. One evening, reviewing potential acquisition targets, I noticed a luxury real estate listing that caught my attention for reasons beyond business strategy. It was time to make a statement that even my family couldn't ignore. The Westlake estate appeared in my email as part of a luxury property newsletter I rarely read. Located in Greenwich, Connecticut, the 15,000-square-foot mansion sat on 8 manicured acres with views of Long Island Sound. The listing described it as the crown jewel of New England real estate with an asking price of $4.8 million. I might have scrolled past it entirely if not for one detail that made my finger freeze mid-swipe. The property was in Windward Hills, the exclusive neighborhood where Derek had been telling our parents he would eventually live. For years, he had described his future estate there in elaborate detail, promising our parents guest quarters and access to the community's prestigious social circles. A quick search confirmed the property had just hit the market. According to the listing agent's description, there had already been exceptional interest from prominent families, with private viewing scheduled for the coming weeks. Curiosity piqued, I called my assistant to arrange a viewing the following day. What began as idle interest crystallized into something more purposeful during that first tour. The previous owners completed a full renovation just last year. The agent, Sophia Reynolds, explained as we walked through soaring spaces with floor-to-ceiling windows, smart home technology throughout, geothermal heating, infinity pool overlooking the sound, wine cellar with capacity for 2,000 bottles. The house was undeniably spectacular, but I remained measured in my response until Sophia mentioned something that changed everything. "We actually have a potential buyer who's viewed the property twice already," she noted casually. "He's bringing his parents this weekend to show them what would be their guest quarters. He works in finance as well." "Would that happen to be Derek Mitchell?" I asked, maintaining a neutral expression. Sophia's surprised look confirmed my suspicion before she nodded. "You know him?" "He's my brother," I replied simply. "We're competitively close." That evening, I researched the property thoroughly, reviewing comparable sales, tax records, and neighborhood development plans. The estate was fairly priced, given the location and recent renovations, possibly even undervalued in the current market. More importantly, I confirmed through my financial sources that Derek had been arranging financing for the purchase, but hadn't secured full approval yet. What had begun as curiosity evolved into a fully formed plan. If Derek wanted this house as his status symbol, his proof that he had made it, then nothing would make a clearer statement than my owning it instead. Not out of spite, but as tangible evidence that no amount of family favoritism, sabotage, or deception could prevent my success. I contacted Sophia the next morning. "I'd like to make an all-cash offer on the Westlake estate," I stated. $5,200,000, with a 7-day close and no contingencies. Her momentary silence conveyed her surprise before professionalism took over. "That's substantially above asking price, Miss Mitchell. And the timeline is aggressive." "I understand. Those are my terms. I can wire a $500,000 deposit today to demonstrate my commitment." "What about the inspection period?" "Most buyers require at least..." "No inspection period," I interrupted. "I'll take the property as is." "I assume that's acceptable to the sellers?" Within hours, my offer was accepted. The sellers, an older couple downsizing to Florida, were delighted to avoid the typical months-long sales process and financing complications. I arranged for the necessary funds to be liquidated from my personal investment portfolio. The transaction completed with the discretion that wealth commands. I instructed my attorneys to maintain absolute confidentiality throughout the closing process. The deed would be recorded under a trust name unconnected to me personally, ensuring Derek wouldn't discover the buyer's identity through public records. Sophia agreed to continue showing the property to other potential buyers, including Derek and my parents, as if it were still available. We've had an accepted offer, but nothing's final until closing, she would tell them, a statement technically true until all paperwork was signed. On the day Derek brought my parents to view what he expected to be their future home away from home, I received hourly updates from Sophia. They spent nearly 3 hours touring the property, with Derek apparently describing in detail where his future children would play and how he would entertain important clients on the terrace overlooking the Sound. My mother reportedly teared up when viewing the guest apartment, according to Sophia, expressing how proud she was of Derek's incredible success. My father discussed expansion possibilities for the wine cellar, as he'd always fancied himself a collector though had never had the means to pursue it seriously. They seem absolutely certain he'll get the property, Sophia texted after the showing. He told them he's just finalizing some financial details before making an offer. What Derek couldn't know, was that I had already transferred the full $5.2 million to escrow that morning. The property would officially become mine in 5 days. The closing process proceeded smoothly. I arranged for minimal furniture to be moved in immediately, just enough to make the house appear lived in for what would come next. A security system with cameras was my first priority, along with staff to maintain the grounds. My personal items would follow gradually. I didn't plan to fully relocate from my Manhattan apartment, but wanted the house ready for occasional use. 2 days after closing, I received an agitated call from Sophia. "Your brother just submitted an offer," she said, sounding uncomfortable. "He's offering asking price with conventional financing. He has no idea the house is already sold. Please tell him another buyer secured the property with a significantly higher offer," I instructed. "No need to mention who that buyer is yet." Hours later, Sophia called again. "He's quite upset," she reported. "He's demanding to know who bought it and is offering to increase his bid." I explained the deal has closed and the property is no longer available. "Thank you for handling it professionally," I replied. "I'll take it from here." That evening, predictably, my mother called. Her voice carried the familiar tone of disappointment she reserved specially for me. "Cassandra, have you heard what happened to your brother? Some investor swooped in and stole the Westlake house from right under him. He's devastated. He had already promised us we could spend summers there." "That sounds upsetting," I replied neutrally. "Perhaps there will be other properties." "You don't understand," she continued. "This was his dream home. He'd already started the loan approval. Now some wealthy foreigner has taken it by throwing money around. It's terribly unfair." I nearly corrected her assumption about the buyer, but decided the revelation would be more effective in person. "I'm planning a housewarming party in Greenwich next month," I said instead. "I'd like you, Dad, and Derek to attend." "You bought a house in Greenwich?" Her surprise couldn't have been more evident. "I didn't think your business was doing that well." "It's doing fine, Mother. The invitation will arrive next week." As I hung up, I felt no triumph or vindication, just a calm certainty that for once, reality would speak louder than their perceptions. The house itself wasn't the point, it was what it represented. After decades of dismissal and sabotage, I had created success they couldn't deny or diminish. The formal invitations went out the following week on heavy cream stationery, requesting the pleasure of your company at a housewarming celebration, without specifying the address, only Greenwich, Connecticut as the location. I instructed guests to arrive at a local restaurant where shuttles would transport them to the residence, a common practice for events in exclusive neighborhoods. Derek called immediately after receiving his invitation. "What is this, Cassandra? You can't possibly have bought in Greenwich. The shuttles will depart at 7 p.m. sharp," I replied, ignoring his disbelief. "Business casual attire is suggested." "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "If this is some attempt to compete with me after I secured the Westlake property—" "You secured the Westlake property?" I asked innocently. "Congratulations. I look forward to seeing it someday." "Well, there have been some complications with the seller, but it's practically mine," he backtracked. "Anyway, where exactly did you buy? Not that I really have time for your little party." "I suppose you'll find out if you attend," I replied before ending the call. The evening of the party arrived with perfect early summer weather. I stood in the grand foyer of the Westlake estate, watching through floor-to-ceiling windows as the first shuttle of guests wound up the long driveway. Among the approximately 50 attendees were key clients, industry colleagues, both my mentors, and close friends who had supported me through the years. The final shuttle would carry only my family, scheduled to arrive 20 minutes after the other guests. As I watched their car approach, I felt surprisingly calm. This wasn't about humiliating Derek or proving something to my parents. It was about closing a chapter, about finally stepping fully into my own power without seeking their validation. A lifetime of waiting for their approval had ended. I no longer needed it. The expression on Derek's face when he stepped into the grand foyer of what he had thought would be his future home was worth more than the $5.2 million I had paid for the property. Shock, confusion, and dawning comprehension played across his features in rapid succession. My mother gasped audibly, while my father stood frozen, champagne flute suspended halfway to his lips. "Welcome to my home," I said simply, approaching them with practiced poise. "I'm so glad you could attend." This is the Westlake property," Derek stammered, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. "How are you? Why are you?" "I believe you've toured it before," I replied with deliberate casualness. "The previous owners completed a beautiful renovation. Would you like to see the rest? I've made a few changes already." My mother recovered first, her social training kicking in despite her evident confusion. "Cassandra, dear, there must be some mistake. This house was going to be Derek's. He told us all about his plans." "No mistake, Mother. I purchased it 2 weeks ago. All cash offer, 7-day close." I gestured toward the living room where other guests were mingling. "Please enjoy the party. The chef has prepared an incredible selection." My father's expression had hardened from confusion to suspicion. "What kind of game are you playing, Cassandra? There's no way you could afford this property." I met his gaze directly. "It's not a game, Dad. And I assure you, the $5.2 million was transferred from my accounts. Would you like to see the closing documents? I have copies in my office." $5.2 million? Derek's voice cracked. That's almost $500,000 over asking price." "Sometimes efficiency comes at a premium," I replied. I didn't want complications or delays. As I led them further into the house, Derek's composure continued deteriorating. He stared at the spaces he had envisioned as his own, the living room where he'd planned to entertain clients, the chef's kitchen he'd described to our parents, the master suite with its panoramic water views. Each room seemed to intensify his agitation. "You did this deliberately," he finally hissed when we reached the terrace overlooking Long Island Sound, momentarily separated from our parents and other guests. "You knew I was buying this house. You stole it just to spite me." I regarded him calmly. "Is that what you think happened, Derek? That I spent over $5 million to spite you? Maybe you should consider that not everything is about you. Then why this house? Why Greenwich? You've always lived in Manhattan. Because it's an excellent investment in a desirable location. Because I appreciated the architecture and setting. Because I can." I took a sip of champagne. "The same reasons you wanted it, I imagine." His face flushed with anger. "You've always been jealous of me. Ever since we were kids, you couldn't stand that Mom and Dad favored me. This is just another pathetic attempt to prove something. The accusation might have wounded me years earlier, but now it simply confirmed how little he understood." "Derek, I stopped trying to prove anything to our parents long ago. This house isn't about them or you. It's about what I've built, despite not because of my family." "Built?" he scoffed. "You got lucky with a few investments. I'm the one with the real financial pedigree. Is that what you tell yourself? Is that what you told the Hampton Group when you tried to destroy my firm with lies? What you told my other clients when you called them directly spreading fabrications about regulatory investigations?" His expression faltered slightly before hardening again. "Business is competitive. You should know that. There's competitive, and then there's sabotage. Taking my college investment idea, stealing my personal investment strategies for our parents' retirement funds, sending a fraudulent letter to my employer, approaching my clients with deliberate misinformation that's not competition, Derek. That's desperation. "You can't prove any of that," he replied. But his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I can. I have documentation of everything, including your call to Robert Hampton. I simply chose not to pursue legal action because, despite everything, you're still my brother." Our tense exchange was interrupted by my mother joining us on the terrace, my father close behind. Her expression was a mix of bewilderment and growing concern. "Cassandra, I don't understand how this is possible," she began. "Your brother has been at Goldman Sachs, then started his own successful firm. You've been at some small company we've barely heard about. How could you possibly afford a house like this when Derek couldn't secure financing?" The moment felt pivotal, a chance to finally speak truths long suppressed. "Mother, I don't have some small company. I founded and run Mitchell Sustainable Capital, which currently manages over $900 million in assets. My firm has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Bloomberg. I was named to the Forbes 40 Under 40 list last year." My father shook his head dismissively. "That can't be right. Derek has kept us informed about your career. He said your firm was struggling, barely staying afloat." "Did he?" I glanced at Derek, whose expression had turned defensive. "And did he also tell you that his own firm has been underperforming the market by significant margins? That he's lost major clients? That he's been using my investment strategies without understanding the underlying principles?" "That's a lie," Derek interjected. "My firm is doing fine." "Is it?" I reached into my clutch and withdrew a folded document I'd prepared for this moment. "This is a performance comparison of our firms over the past 3 years, verified by independent auditors. My firm has averaged 24% annual returns. Yours has averaged 8% below market indices during the same period." My father snatched the document, scanning it with growing discomfort. "These figures can't be accurate." "They are. And there's something else you should know." I hesitated, weighing whether to deliver the final revelation. "Derek's firm is currently under SEC investigation for potential misrepresentation of performance metrics to clients. Not my firm, his." Derek's face drained of color. "How did you?" "I have colleagues at the commission," I replied quietly. "The investigation isn't public yet, but it will be soon." My mother looked between us, confusion giving way to distress. "Derek, is this true?" His momentary silence was confirmation enough before he launched into frantic justification. "It's just a routine examination. These things happen all the time in finance. They won't find anything substantial." "They already have," I corrected gently. "The preliminary findings indicate deliberate pattern of performance misrepresentation spanning 2 years." The revelation hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. My parents looked stunned, their worldview visibly crumbling as decades of carefully maintained illusions collapsed. "Why would you keep this from us?" my father finally asked Derek, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "Because he's been lying to you for years," I answered when Derek remained silent. "About his success, about my failures, about everything. The reality is that while you've been dismissing my achievements and celebrating his fabrications, I've built one of the fastest-growing investment firms in the country while he's been struggling to keep his afloat." "That's not," Derek began, but I cut him off. "It is. And there's more you need to know." I turned directly to my parents. "Your retirement accounts that Derek has been managing? They're not just underperforming, they're in serious trouble. Based on the last statements I've seen, you've lost over 70% of your original investment. If the SEC investigation proceeds as expected, those accounts could be frozen indefinitely." My mother sank into a nearby chair, her social composure finally shattering. "But that's all we have for retirement. We put everything with Derek because he said it was the safest option." The devastation on their faces brought me no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for what our family relationships had become. Years of favoritism and manipulation had led to this moment of painful truth. Derek finally broke his silence, his tone shifting from defiance to accusation. "This is what you wanted all along, isn't it, Cassandra? To turn them against me? To destroy our family?" I shook my head slowly. "No, Derek. I wanted what every child wants: parents who believed in me, a brother who supported me instead of sabotaging me. I wanted a family that saw me for who I actually am, not who they decided I should be. My father stood stiffly, pride battling with the undeniable evidence before him. "What happens now?" he asked, addressing me directly for perhaps the first time in years. "That depends on all of you," I replied. "I can help stabilize your financial situation, create a proper retirement plan that doesn't depend on Derek's management. But going forward, I need honesty. No more pretending, no more favoritism, no more sabotage. A real family, or nothing at all." Derek stormed away without responding, disappearing into the crowd of guests. My parents remained on the terrace, looking suddenly older and uncertain in the golden evening light. The family mythology they had cultivated for decades had crumbled, leaving only the uncomfortable truth in its place. I excused myself to attend to other guests, leaving them to process this new reality. As I moved through the rooms of my new home, greeting clients and friends, I felt a strange lightness. The confrontation I had avoided for years had finally occurred, and, though painful, it had been necessary. The truth, once spoken, could never be unheard. Whatever happened next would at least be based on reality, not illusion. In the months following the housewarming party, our family entered unfamiliar territory, a landscape of painful truths and tentative rebuilding. Derek initially refused all contact, disappearing to Miami where he attempted to rebuild his professional reputation. My parents, faced with financial ruin after the SEC officially announced their investigation into Derek's firm, had no choice but to accept my offer of help. The first meeting with my parents in my Manhattan office was stilted and formal. My father, a proud man unaccustomed to asking for assistance, could barely meet my eyes as I reviewed their financial situation. "The accounts Derek managed have lost approximately 80% of their value," I explained gently, showing them the statements I'd analyzed. "Additionally, these assets may be frozen during the SEC investigation, potentially for several months." "We had no idea," my mother whispered, clutching my father's hand. "He always said everything was fine, that the market was just volatile." "Markets are volatile," I acknowledged, "but not to this extent. This was mismanagement. Pure and simple." My father cleared his throat. "And now we have nothing for retirement. At our age, there's no time to rebuild." "That's not entirely true," I replied, sliding a folder across the desk. "I've developed a financial recovery plan. It's conservative but stable, designed to provide you with sufficient monthly income and preserve principal." They examined the documents with confusion. "Where would this money come from?" my father asked. "We don't have these kinds of assets anymore." "I do," I said simply. "I'm establishing a trust with $3 million. You'll receive the income it generates but won't have access to the principal, which will eventually fund educational trusts for any grandchildren." Their shock was palpable. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do this? After how we've treated you?" It was the first acknowledgement of their behavior I'd ever heard. "Because you're still my parents," I replied. "But this comes with conditions." I outlined my terms clearly. They would have no contact with Derek until he took responsibility for his actions. They would attend family therapy sessions with me. Most importantly, they would make genuine efforts to understand who I actually was, not who they had decided I should be. "These aren't punishments," I explained. "They're boundaries. I'm willing to help you, but I won't continue the dysfunctional patterns that brought us here." My father nodded slowly, decades of pride giving way to necessity and perhaps a glimmer of recognition. "We don't deserve this chance." "Maybe not," I agreed. "But healing isn't about what people deserve, it's about choosing a different path forward." Their acceptance of my terms marked the beginning of a painful but necessary transformation. Our first therapy sessions were awkward and defensive, with my parents struggling to acknowledge their favoritism and its impact. The therapist, Dr. Larson, skillfully guided us through decades of accumulated hurt and misperception. During our fourth session, my mother finally broke down. "I never thought I was hurting you," she sobbed. "I genuinely believed Derek needed more support to succeed, while you seemed so capable on your own. I thought I was being fair by giving him more attention. But even when evidence suggested otherwise, you maintained that belief," Dr. Larson observed. When Cassandra outperformed academically, when her career flourished while Derek's floundered, you adjusted the narrative rather than your perception. My father, typically stoic, spoke up unexpectedly. Derek reminded me of myself struggling, needing validation. Cassandra seemed like my own father, naturally gifted, self-sufficient. I spent my childhood trying to earn my father's approval and never getting it. I didn't want Derek to experience that. So instead, Dr. Larson noted, Cassandra experienced it. The realization visibly shook him. Generational patterns exposed, we began the slow work of creating healthier relationships. Meanwhile, the professional consequences of Derek's actions unfolded. The SEC investigation resulted in significant fines and a 5-year ban from financial advisory roles. Most of his clients withdrew their investments, and his firm collapsed under regulatory scrutiny. My parents' accounts remained frozen for months during the investigation, reinforcing their dependence on my assistance. 3 months after going silent, Derek reached out unexpectedly. His email was brief but significant. I need help. Can we talk? We met at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant in Midtown. The Derek who arrived bore little resemblance to the confident, entitled brother I'd known. He looked thinner, less polished, humbled by circumstance. My firm is finished, he stated without preamble. The SEC fines wiped out my savings. I can't work in finance for 5 years. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. I've been seeing a therapist, he admitted, surprising me. She's helping me understand why I did what I did, why I couldn't stand seeing you succeed. He paused, struggling with the words. I've spent my entire life believing I was special, entitled to success. When you achieved it legitimately while I was failing, I couldn't accept that reality. So you tried to destroy what I built, I concluded. Yes. He met my eyes for the first time. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I am sorry, Cassandra. Truly sorry. The apology felt sincere, a first step rather than a resolution. What will you do now? I asked. I don't know. Finance is all I know, and that door is closed. Not entirely, I replied. You can't manage other people's money, but you can still apply your knowledge in other contexts. Hope flickered in his expression. What do you mean? I have connections in financial education, teaching investment principles to college students. It would be a fraction of what you earned before, but it's a fresh start using your expertise constructively. His surprise was evident. You'd help me after everything I've done? I'm offering a possibility, not a handout, I clarified. Whether you rebuild your life is entirely up to you. But yes, I'll make the introduction if you're serious about changing. That conversation marked the beginning of Derek's own journey toward accountability. The brother who had sabotaged me repeatedly began the humbling process of rebuilding his life from scratch, teaching intro to finance courses at a community college while undergoing intensive therapy. 6 months after the housewarming party, my firm reached a significant milestone, over $1 billion in assets under management. The achievement received coverage in major financial publications, with The Economist featuring me in a piece about women reshaping investment philosophy. I sent copies to my parents without comment, not to boast, but to help them see the reality they had denied for so long. My mother called after receiving the magazine. We're very proud of you, Cassandra, she said, her voice carrying new warmth. I know we never said it before, but we are now. Your father and I have been reading everything we can find about your work. We had no idea how significant your contributions to sustainable investment have been. The acknowledgement, so long awaited, felt surprisingly bittersweet. Thank you, I replied simply. That means a lot. Dr. Larson has helped us understand how much our behavior hurt you, she continued. We can never make up for those years, but we hope you'll give us the chance to know you now, the real you, not who we thought you should be. As winter turned to spring, I reconnected with both mentors who had believed in me when my family didn't. Mrs. Reynolds, now retired, visited my Greenwich home for a weekend, and I gave Professor Harrison a tour of my firm's offices. Both expressed pride not just in my professional accomplishments but in my personal growth. The true measure of success, Mrs. Reynolds observed as we walked the grounds of the estate, isn't the house or the money, It's who you've become despite the obstacles. You didn't just succeed financially, you broke a dysfunctional family pattern that could have continued for generations. 1 year after purchasing the Westlake estate, I hosted another gathering, smaller, more intimate, focused on healing rather than revelation. My parents attended, as did Derek, along with Mrs. Reynolds, Professor Harrison, and a few close friends who had supported me through difficult years. As we enjoyed dinner on the terrace overlooking the Sound, I observed the subtle shifts in our family dynamic. My father asked thoughtful questions about my investment philosophy. My mother showed genuine interest in my plans to expand the firm internationally. Derek, still finding his way, spoke candidly about his teaching experiences and ongoing therapy. None of us pretended the past hadn't happened or that our relationships were fully healed. The wounds created over decades would require more than a year to mend completely. But we were attempting something new. A family based on truth rather than illusion, on mutual respect rather than favoritism. Later that evening, standing alone on the terrace after my guests had departed, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The house around me, once intended as my ultimate statement of vindication, had become something different. Not a weapon or a trophy, but simply a beautiful home where healing could begin. The success I had achieved wasn't about proving my worth to a family that couldn't see it. It was about creating something meaningful that aligned with my values and vision. The $5.2 million I paid wasn't the price of revenge, but of freedom from seeking validation from those unable to give it. True victory wasn't in outshining Derek or forcing my parents to acknowledge my achievements. It was in breaking free from the need for their approval altogether, while still remaining open to the possibility of genuine connection. As I watched the moonlight on the water, I felt peace rather than vindication. The little girl who had once cried herself to sleep after being dismissed and diminished had grown into a woman who defined success on her own terms. The greatest revenge hadn't been purchasing my brother's dream house, it had been building a life so authentically mine that no one else's opinions could diminish it. Have you ever had to prove your worth to family members who couldn't see your potential? How did you handle that situation? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey of overcoming family dynamics and finding success despite obstacles resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more authentic life stories. Thank you for joining me today. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, but getting free. Wishing you success on your own terms, whatever that looks like for you.